If I could ask the wizard for anything, it would be please release the sequel now. Don't make me wait for it. My brain is melting. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insight into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, Wicked really is on my brain, but I know we all got to get in line for the sequel and we got to wait it out. That's okay. We'll make it together. But in the meantime, I think you'll be as pleased as I was with today's guests, Winnie Holzman, who adapted the book Wicked into the musical Wicked and is now the co-screenwriter of the movie Wicked, and she is joined with co-writer Dana Fox. Winnie and Dana were so forthcoming about their creative process, and it really was a fascinating process for this project that certainly took its time to make it to the screen, but clearly took the correct amount of time to make it to the screen because the movie turned out so fantastic. There's a lot of great information in here about adaptation because it really is such an interesting adaptation where they added so much to the already great musical, which, by the way, it really was a risk to color that far outside the lines. There's that old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they really retooled a lot, but did so with such loving care that it worked. Without a doubt, Winnie and Dana were very forthcoming about their creative process and what it took to bring Wicked to the screen. So I know you'll dig this episode. Now, when it comes to this episode, it was unfortunately recorded on a very dark day in Los Angeles history. We knew that the fires were breaking out in the Palisades and we were monitoring it during the day, but pretty much once the interview was completed, things really started to get out of control. And it's a tough time for the city of Los Angeles, and our hearts really go out to everybody that was affected by the fires in Pacific Palisades and Altadena and really all over the Southland. So many people were affected. There's certainly a resilience to Los Angelinos wanting to rebuild and wanting to get a fresh start and hopefully stay as safe as they can and help each other out. And if you're listening and you want to help from anywhere in the world, there's no amount too small to send in because so many people have been affected. And if you do want to donate, there's plenty of places you could go, but two right off the bat would be the LAFD Foundation Wildfire Emergency Fund, which helps out the firefighters who did such a great job under horrible conditions. And also the California Fire Foundation, which helps out victims of fires throughout the state. Everyone's still picking up the pieces, and it's nice that we could be connected online the way that we are. So if you're in the mood to donate, don't hesitate, and thanks for considering. And before we get to our interview, we have a quick word from today's sponsor, the Sundance Film Festival. Sundance is returning in Park City, Utah, January 23rd through February 2nd in person with online screenings beginning on January 30th. Single tickets for in-person and online screenings go on sale on January 16th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. So mark your calendars, January 16th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. You could get ready for tickets to go on sale by exploring the program and favoring screening times you'd like to see online or in person. It'll make your checkout process even smoother before things sell out when tickets go on sale on the 16th, because you'll already have a list and you'll be ready to go. I'll be at Sundance in person this year, so if you see me, of course, say hi. And aside from buying tickets to films in person or online, there's also the Short Films Pass online, which lets you watch the short film program on demand. To look at the schedule and then, of course, to buy tickets on January 16th, you could visit festival.sundance.org to get more information and explore the program. That link, once again, festival.sundance.org. It really has been cool that Sundance has brought their festival to so many people online in recent years. So thanks for considering supporting independent film. And while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We turned 12 this year and we couldn't have done it without you. And there's a lot going on in the magazine. Our awards season issue, our Gladiator 2 issue is out, and we are continuing to update it with new articles because we're a digital magazine. We could do that. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, here's discount coupon code SAVE5 That's save and then number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. All you got to do is enter it into the little shopping cart at backstory.net, and don't worry, you'll still have access to the iPad app with your login credentials there as well. And you could even give Backstory as a gift subscription. All you need to do is tick the gift subscription box, and that'll set you up. Now, one word of advice: once you complete your transaction, that notification will go out to the email of the person you are giving the gift to immediately. So you might want to maybe write Backstory Magazine as a gift on a card and then do the subscription after you give them the gift, or just be very aware of when you're giving them the gift because they'll be notified. So there's no element of surprise there, aside from the cool email that they'll get. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. That's right. You could see us talking on Zoom on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would really mean a lot to me to have your support for independent entertainment journalism. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with screenwriters Winnie Holzman and Dana Fox about their latest film, Wicked, which is in theaters now and also on digital. Winnie, Dana, it's great to see you. How you doing today?
Great. We're so happy to be here. We appreciate you taking the time.
I am excited. I love Wicked. What you accomplished with this film adaptation of the musical is amazing. One of the first things that I would love to do is to really give our listeners a baseline for each of you. So Winnie, starting with you, I know you went to Princeton for creative writing. You got a master's in musical theater from NYU Musical Theater Program. You even studied under Stephen Sondheim, which is incredible. And I'm just curious, what was one of your most eye-opening moments in the musical theater program at NYU that really kind of coalesced for you about not just writing, but writing for musical theater?
Wow. Big question, Jeff. Well, first of all, when I studied with Sondheim, we did have him and Hal Prince in a class. It was brief. It was like, I think it was about 6 weeks. Who cares? It was amazing. It might have been even less than that, but felt like 6 weeks, if you know what I mean. Maybe it was 3 weeks. But one of the things I got, and this is just sort of a big thing, is all the luminaries that were teaching us were still in the midst of their own careers. And they were so interested in being generous and imparting what they felt that they had learned, craft-wise and otherwise. So they took time out of it's not like these guys were retired going, what could I do? Hal Prince and Stephen Sondheim were about to open Merrily on Broadway the summer that they spent teaching us. That gave me this sense of the humility that they all carried, the way that they wanted to be devoted to the idea of musicals, of keeping it going, keeping it fresh, letting the new generation have it, but giving them what they could. That was something that touched my heart so much about these incredible people. I mean, there was a lot of craft stuff that came up, as you can imagine, but Arthur Lawrence, who you didn't mention, was the person who actually spent the most time with us and mentored me. And Arthur was a big one for brevity and understanding how to edit yourself. So he really taught us, and my friends and I we're still friends, some of us who were in the program, we talk about this all the time. I never stopped using this, not just for musicals, for everything I've ever written in my life. The idea of just writing in a free way and letting it be big and verbose and letting yourself do way too much, and then finding how few amount of words you really need to say the same thing. And that's a process. That's not something you should do right away. You should let yourself go and go wild and say much more than you even need. But then the idea of just making each word like plead for its life, you know what I mean? And making sure that you've shaken out everything that isn't needed. That's one of the big ones that I carry with me. It's like, I've never stopped using that.
Winnie, I never knew that about that you had that connection with Sondheim. It's so funny. This week, for some reason I can't explain, I suddenly became obsessed with building a Sondheim playlist for myself. And I have been listening to it on repeat like 2 weeks. The first song is Being Alive. Every time I hear it, I have to hold myself up on something because I find it so emotional. And that's amazing that you got that chance. It's wonderful. Well, my chance to have something like that was the chance I had to work with you and to listen to you and Steven honestly talking about Wicked. So I feel like I got my version of that with this experience.
And we'll get to that, I promise. Dana,
Oh, sorry.
you went, no, it's okay. You went to Stanford and you then went to USC, my alma mater as well, for the START program to film school because you originally wanted to produce, but you fell in love with writing. And so I guess my question to you is how did you fall in love with writing? Because you started out as a Starkey, as they're known, in the Peter Stark producing program, and you transitioned over to writing.
Yeah, I think the truth of that is actually that I wasn't brave enough to admit that I wanted to be a writer. And I didn't come from a family where it was okay to not work and not, make money. My dad did not have any money growing up. And so it was instilled in me that, you work and work and work and work. And that is what you do. And you have to take care of your family and you have to, so I knew from a very early age, I started working when I was probably 13. I'm sure it was illegal, whatever I did. So I've always had jobs and it was totally impractical and crazy and not a thing in my family to say, I want to be a writer. So I think I knew I wanted to be in a creative version of the movie business, whether it was a writer or a director or something. I think I knew that from by the time I was maybe 12. I started asking my parents to see if they could help me find a theater to work in. They were like, no 12-year-old can work in a theater. Like, what are you talking about? And then I found the phone book one day. And because for all of your listeners who don't know what a phone book is, it was a giant thing with pieces of paper in it that had people's phone numbers in it. And I went through that and I found the local theater and I called them and I said, hi, I'm 12 years old and I really want to work in theater. Could I be an intern? Could I do anything? And they said, first of all, how do you know what the word intern means? Second of all, no, that's totally illegal. And they said, but we do have a play that we're doing and you could come audition. There is one role for a child. And so I went and I auditioned and I got that role. So that was my way into theater.
Wow.
And then I just sort of tried to do any theater I could do. I became obsessed with musical theater. And that was kind of my gateway drug into movies. And then when I went to Stanford, that was me being a good girl and doing what I was supposed to do and getting all A pluses. And, again, the idea that I would then say, oh, I want to be a writer. It was like my dad would have just pictured like I'm in a beret, I'm smoking a cigarette, I'm never making a dime in my entire life. So I just couldn't do that. So I heard that the USC film school program, the Peter Stark program, I heard it was harder to get into than Harvard. And I was like, well, I want to try to do that. That sounds very sexy. Like I'm very turned on by the idea of that. So I applied to the program and I got in. And that was actually really fortuitous because within that program, I then had a screenwriting class and I had to write 30 pages of a screenplay. And that was the first time I had ever done almost any creative writing because I had avoided it because I knew I was going to be bad at it. And I didn't want to find out that I was bad at it. And so I did the 30 pages and my teacher was lovely to me. And she said, this is pretty good. I mean, it's sort of bad, but it's also pretty good. And she said, don't ever let anybody tell you that structure is for the boys. It's not. It's for the girls. Here's why. Because structure is emotion. It is just characters and emotion. That's all it is. And you're very good at that. And I was like, just hearing that made me think, oh my God, maybe I could actually do this. So that was kind of what transitioned me into wanting to be a writer.
Well, interestingly, Winnie, after school for you, you went out, you did plays, you did musicals, you had your own stuff like hit the stage, but then your transition into the film industry was kind of with Ed Zwick, in which you became a staff writer on 30 something, and then you created the absolutely excellent one-season TV show My So-Called Life, which was awesome as well. What was your light bulb moment of transitioning from theater to film writing? Because they are separate and different, but you did so quite elegantly.
Thank you. I think that, you're just trying to go somewhere where somebody will open the door and let you in, kind of like what Dana was saying before. So it's like, I wasn't really thinking, oh, should it be movies? Should it be musicals? I never really thought I should write a musical. But when I heard about this program, I had to. My friend was pushing me going, you've got to apply to this. I hear that there aren't that many women applying. And I got a scholarship to go. And that was my reason for going was, I wanted to meet Stephen Sondheim and those awesome guys. Betty Comden was there too. I mean, I know I'm dropping a lot of names, but this was extremely significant.
Continue.
And they were so generous, like I said, and so kind, but hard on, very critical. It's not like everything I wrote, they were going, oh, how beautiful. plenty of intense criticism, especially from Arthur Lawrence. What I was going to say is that I did have a big turning point in my life, it's a pretty spiritual moment, because I'd been working on this musical from the time it was our thesis musical. My friend David Evans and he wrote the music and I wrote the lyrics, and we co-wrote the book, and it did open. It took many, many, many years, but then it finally did open off Broadway, and it was too small to be called Savage, but critics just really disliked it, except for one critic at the New Yorker. But everyone else really hated this musical, which is, it had its faults, but honestly, I think they overreacted just a little bit. We had this amazing cast, but this was a very significant, as you might imagine, Jeff, moment for me. Because one day I was just walking down Broadway, actually, after like a few weeks after this had happened. My daughter was in a stroller, and I stopped dead in my tracks, and I thought to myself, hang on, is this what my story is? 9 people who I've never met, who didn't like what I wrote, they determine my life, and they determine my future. Is that how it's going to be? And it was like talking to myself, and it was very much like I say, a spiritual moment. I had to reflect, and the answer came to me, no, that's not a good way to live. That did not feel right to me, and it felt wrong, in fact. So I just knew that I was going to, because you're asking yourself at that moment, well, why am I doing it? Am I doing it so that a critic will say it was okay and I'll get approval in that sense? I mean, of course, I love approval. I really do. And I love praise. I love compliments. I love them. But I can't make that be my reason for my raison d'etre, just to speak French for a second.
And for those following along, she is, of course, talking about the musical Birds of Paradise that was panned. And so, was your rebound to television?
Well, when I say my rebound was within me.
Yeah.
In other words, my rebound was, I don't know what it's going to be, and I don't know what I'm going to write, but I'm a writer and I'm going to keep writing. It got very kind of Zen. I'm not a Buddhist, but it got very much kind of like, it doesn't even matter what the outcome is. I just need to write. Yeah. And then my husband's an actor, and he's a wonderful actor, and he got offered a lead in a series, and we went out to LA. And at that point, I was just being a mom and thinking things like, well, maybe I'll go back to acting too, because I used to do a little of that, not very successfully. Through a series of coincidences and events, I got onto the set of 30-something because my brother was shooting it at the time. And then it turned out that this wonderful guy, wonderful writer named Richard Kramer, it was his script, and he was on set, and he came up to me and he said, my brother told me you were a really good writer. It turned out his brother had once produced our comedy group. I used to be in a comedy group when I was really young. As you can, I think, imagine from the story about the bad reviews, anyone in any kind of a position who might know saying to me, I heard you were a good writer, it just meant the world to me. And then I went home, and my girlfriend happened to be lying on our couch. She was crashing on our couch at the moment. And she said to me, well, you have to follow up with him, and you have to ask him for advice about your career. And I said, what career? And she said, no, you do have to follow up. So I did that, and that led to me writing a spec script. And that led to me working on 30-something, which was like going to film school.
Dana, when you got out of film school, like in the same way that Winnie studied under some theater greats, you studied under some film and television greats. You were assistant for Go and Millar right as they were doing Smallville. You also worked for John August. What were some of the things that you noticed maybe about their creative habits that inspired you in your own work, which eventually led to The Wedding Date in 2005, your debut feature film that was produced, and then What Happens in Vegas?
So The Wedding Date, which was also terribly panned. And I will say, Winnie, I don't know if you feel this way, but I actually now in retrospect think having the first thing you've ever really put out there be panned so terribly by people is preferable to starting off and having someone just love you with a bang.
It was awesome. I mean,
it was amazing.
Not at the time. I mean, at the time.
No, it was the worst thing that's ever happened to me at the time. But in retrospect, what it gave me was a sense of bulletproofness, because I had 100%. Feared that as a perfectionist and as a good girl who wanted to get A pluses. That had been my deepest fear my entire life, was I would put myself out there and the world would be like, oh shit, that's bad. And that's exactly what happened. And I lived through it. And I still wanted to do the work. I still wanted to wake up every day and do the thing. And so that was incredibly helpful to me. That was the beginning of learning that I have to stop trying to please everybody. I have to just treat this as I care about this work and I want to do the best I can. So let me just go work hard at this work.
100%. Could not
It was
agree
very,
more.
very freeing in the end, ultimately.
Freeing.
Yes. So I was lucky enough to work with those incredible people that you mentioned. And for me, what that gave me an opportunity to do was watch how people who were at the absolute top of their fields and who still are, both of them, both groups are still at the absolute tops of their fields, watch these sort of experts in it do it and realize that there is no magic trick to it. It is hard work every single day that starts at 9 a.m., frequently ends at 11 p.m. And it is a job that is pretty thankless, that the criticism comes no matter what you do. You're going to constantly be getting criticism. That was really helpful to see that and to see but these guys are the best. They're the ones getting all the jobs and doing so well. And then I'm listening to the notes and there's a million notes. And it's like, oh, that's the way it's supposed to work. Is there's supposed to be a million notes and they're going to continue to get notes. And then at a certain point, you have to make the thing. They stop giving you notes because you have to show up on set. That's it. So it was super helpful to demystify the process and to see them do it so well. It was also, frankly, really wonderful working with John August because, he has a husband and had a family, and watching and learning that you can have a husband and a family and you can have a relationship and you can care about your personal life in addition to being a workaholic, which I was and which John was, seeing that and understanding that you can be a workaholic but still find balance and have a rich life. That was really meaningful to me. And similar to what Winnie was saying, I found it incredibly touching the way that, John August still reaches out to me constantly and saying, hey, is there anything you need? I'm here. I'm around. It's like he's the nicest person. Anytime I've ever had something that I have been like, I really need eyes on this. I'm struggling and I can't figure this out. I could go to John and say, John, I know you get paid $80 billion a second to do this, but could you look at this for 1 second and help me? He'd be like, of course, any day, all day, anytime you want. Like, he's just so generous in the same way that Winnie was talking about with wanting to pass it on to the younger generation, to the next group of people doing it. And that became who I wanted to be in watching that. I wanted to then pass anything on that I have. I do not want to hold my cookies all to myself. Anything I have learned that is helpful to somebody else, I want to share with other writers.
That's totally John August. Like, he's very altruistic.
The most John August of all time.
Yeah,
yes.
he's so nice and altruistic. Well, I want to get into Wicked, and I just, for both of you, I guess the thing that I somehow didn't realize in the research, Wicked's now available on digital, and there was a good documentary where Mark Platt was the producer. He was talking about how when he first came across Gregory Maguire's 1995 novel, Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, which is based on L. Frank Baum's 1900 novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. When he first came across it, he thought he was just going to make it into a movie. And at a certain point...
A regular movie without any
That's right. Just a regular old movie. I had no idea about that. But at a certain point, he realized that it would be worth investigating how to do it as a musical. And
because Stephen Schwartz would not let him be. I mean,
right.
Stephen Schwartz.
So that's my question to you when he's starting off is what was your first impressions of the book when you were brought on to adapt Wicked into a musical many years ago, the first time around? And then, of course, we're going to get to you now completing the cycle and adapting the musical into the film, because it's a funny cycle.
It's amazing. I mean, what amazing good fortune, I'll just say, to be able to have that opportunity. But I think reading the book, I felt elated and also relieved, because the book is brilliant and it's such a brilliant premise. This idea that you don't know who the Wicked Witch really was. You think you know, but she was actually a person with complexity, who had a family, who had a history, who had a sexuality. And you're going to realize that you've been told a story and you've been kept from the truth. There's so much that was kept from you. That premise, that there's another way to look at the same story. That is a brilliant premise. That's Gregory. But the reason I felt elated and relieved as I'm reading it, I'm going, oh my gosh, I felt excited to be able to dive into this with Stephen Schwartz. I also felt intimidated. I'll just be honest. I mean,
sure.
I had fallen off a horse, but I wasn't really thinking in terms of, so I must find a musical to write. I wanted so much to do a good job for Stephen. Stephen's someone I really, really looked up to and still do. Stephen's a brilliant person and a brilliant writer. He's an amazing person. But one of the reasons I was excited was I felt like there was so much room for us to step in and be ourselves and bring ourselves, because the plot, it wasn't what I wanted to do. Like, in other words, if somebody had said, here's the premise, do you like this plot? I mean, no shade to Gregory, who is a brilliant man, but I did not like the plot. Not that I didn't like it. I didn't like it for a musical, first of all, and it didn't feel like what I would hear somebody, Stephen Schwartz, was saying to me, well, what would you do? So we started to have these long conversations, because we live on different coasts. So we have these long conversations about the book, and we found that we were picturing very similar kinds of things. And that, I think that was when we started to realize, okay, let's try our best. And Stephen used to say, it's ours to fuck up.
Dana, when you first came across it years before you were working with Winnie, what was your reaction to the musical, seeing it for the first time? Do you remember when you saw it or where you were?
I always joke that, like, I wasn't a mega fan when I got the job to do this. And now I've become like the ultimate mega fan, like face painted green every day. Like, I'm completely obsessed with Winnie and Stephen. It's like, I'm like, so I went from being a person who, frankly, like, I didn't really know much about it. I had not
So
read the book.
had you never seen it? Sorry to interrupt.
I think it's possible that I honestly can't remember, Winnie, because I went to see it,
I love it.
like at my earliest time that I could, because we started working together during the pandemic and it was not open.
Right.
So I was like, how am I going to do that? So I went on YouTube and I watched every single clip from every country, every janky video that I could find. And of course, I read Winnie's beautiful script for the musical over and over and over again while listening to the music. So I would play the song right when it would come up, then I would read, and then I would play and I would read. And I did that like 300 times. So I was very, very like comfortable with the material. Just I hadn't been a person who had, because I know if I had seen it once, I would have seen it 42 times. That's why I think I hadn't actually seen it.
But that's actually good in a way, because you're coming to it with fresh eyes.
I think that ended up being good, because I then was able to ask Winnie and Stephen things where I know there were probably things where I was like humiliating myself in front of them, but they were very nice to me. But in a weird way, I think it was helpful to them to have to like answer some sort of very simple questions sometimes. It was like,
absolutely,
does Elphaba have any other powers besides flying? Like, just very simple things like that. And we also knew that we were making a movie for the whole world, and that Wicked, while extraordinarily popular in many, many countries, there were countries that didn't have Wicked. There were countries that didn't have The Wizard of Oz. Sure. So we knew that we were also trying to open the movie up to a whole new generation of people who had never been able to see the musical, whether it was because they couldn't get to a big city, they couldn't, afford to, they weren't of the age to. We knew we wanted those people to feel completely welcome. So for a time, I feel like I played the role of the person who didn't know the musical. And then of course, by the end, I became, I had an IV drip of Wicked in my body, and I was like so in love with it. And now all I do is listen to it like 900 times a day. So I've gone full circle, but I think that was helpful to be that person in the process.
Oh, for sure.
Something I've always wondered, you premiered it in San Francisco, and then you had a 3-month period before going to Broadway.
Yes, we did.
It went through revisions, and that's a very rocky time for a musical to change before its Broadway debut. And this is your first Broadway show. And I'm just curious what you could tell me about that, because from what I've researched, the biggest change was giving Elphaba more stage time to make her a little more prominent, because I guess she was being overshadowed by Glinda at that point. So what can you tell us about that 3-month rewrite that you did before Broadway?
Well, first of all, I want to shout out again to Stephen Schwartz, because Stephen, had done many musicals, because he started when he was 12. I mean, he started really young, and he became successful really young at musical writing. So he had insisted that there would be this downtime after San Francisco, after our tryout. That was part of he had it written down. He made the producers promise that. And his reason was that he had been through this before, and he knew how much we were going to learn from the audiences in San Francisco. And when you're doing that, we were rewriting a lot in San Francisco. I mean, a ton. But there isn't time to rethink something. There's so much to do with staging and the way a set moves, and so we were very limited in what we could actually redo. It was much more than just Elphaba, but that was a very important big strokes thing, which was that. And a lot of it had to do with just landing her more. And a lot of it really was about me because I had written, a lot of funny stuff for Chris, for Glinda. Characters land when they're funny. The Elphaba character was just not coming forth as much. All of this wickedness, the stage play and the movie, has been a team oriented and very collaborative, but we all had, played our parts. So Stephen and I kind of holed up together. I think I went to Connecticut. I'm pretty sure I did. I spent a lot of time. We just spent a lot of time together. We had an unusual thing with Wicked, which was most people have this cliche that they talk about that is often true, which is second act trouble. The first act is amazing and then the second act falls apart. We had first act trouble. We had trouble. We still have a lot of exposition in the play Wicked and in the movie. And it's about how you dole that out and what you decide to give and how much of it you need to give for the audience to understand. And all of that is rather carefully done. Having that whole section where Fiyero first appears and dancing through life, that's a section we rewrote heavily. And we rewrote the wizard scene. It was not just Elphaba. It was the whole first act. The second act it just flew. I mean, no pun intended. But it just flew. It just was like, I don't know, it just tumbled and seemed to always work pretty much. But it was getting off to the right start in the first part of the first act.
Well, it definitely worked. 3 Tonys, 7 Drama Desk Awards, and a worldwide fan base. I guess the only other question that I'm so curious about that only you could answer, Winnie, is out in the desert for 20 years trying to then take this successful musical and make it into a film. I know that could be its own hour-long conversation, but just to boil it down to one question about that, what was the most surreal part of the development process for you? Like the Wicked that definitely shouldn't have been during these 20 years that it took to make it to the screen. What could you tell us about your experiences developing it?
Well, definitely wasn't bad executive notes. That was very little of that. We had almost none of that. I would say virtually none. It wasn't what you're really describing, Jeff, honestly, and you're just very insightful in other ways. It wasn't what you're talking about. It felt very different to be inside it. It really, what it felt like was we just weren't ready. Things hadn't come together yet in the way that we needed it to feel like, okay, we're ready to really make this movie. As Dana was saying before, this is such a mysterious process. No one knows the answer. No one knows how to do this. We're all really just trying to figure out, how do you do this? But the last thing we wanted to do was push something forward that we didn't think was our best work and that we didn't think was going to, and here's the key, bring our musical to another level. And that's what we ended up wanting to do. That's what we always wanted to do. So it didn't feel like a stage wait or like, oh my God, what is happening? I'm looking at my watch. What the fuck? It wasn't like that. It felt like, well, we're just not there yet. But another thing I want to say is that I love that time now. I love it. Because it's like everything when things fell into place, they fell into place like big time, big, really fated to be way. So that time to me now is like this beautiful thing. Oh, the one thing I will say though, I mean, then I'll stop. It did sometimes once in a while, and even when we were working together, Dana and I and John and Stephen Schwartz, it sometimes felt like a weird science experiment for me because I had written, so many versions of a certain beat, let's say, back when we were trying to do it as a stage play. Now, in those intervening years, the years that you called Wandering in the Desert, which I guess was a little bit like that, I had written many other versions of a similar sequence, let's say. Now I was writing new versions of the same sequence. And there was a part of me that was kind of going, is this just meant to break my spirit? Like to see how much I can take? Am I just in a weird experiment where someday somebody's going to say, okay, you passed, you didn't break. But honestly, it was so much fun. A lot of times it was a great, we just had so much fun also. I mean, right. I hope I've conveyed that.
Absolutely. And Dana, what could you tell us about when you came on? You said it was 2020. You were during lockdowns, so you couldn't go out and see the play. What do you remember kind of being your first part of your assignment to come on? And also tell me, did the two of you write together? or did you write separately, sending scenes back and forth to each other?
Yeah, it's funny because I was brought on by John Chu, who I had just worked with on something else with his full team. And we had the most glorious experience. And I told him, whatever you ask me for from here on out, I'm going to say yes, no matter what it is. And then it was wicked. So it was like, wait, you're going to you're going to give me the lottery ticket that has the correct numbers on it? Like, what's happening? It was amazing. So I was instantly so joyful that I got to be invited into this incredible party. It was the world's greatest masterclass, as I have said. And I just remember coming in and thinking, Winnie and Steven are so smart. They're so funny. They're so warm. They're so interesting. And I'm in the middle of this pandemic, and what's waiting for me on the other side of the Zoom is like laundry. And I think I'm cleaning toilets at this period. And I'm like, how am I back to cleaning toilet? Like, what is happening? So I was so happy to be with them. It was like putting my oxygen mask on every day, honestly. And that, the pandemic, we all forget because it was a long time ago, but it was kind of a deep existential moment where we all were sort of like, are humans going to exist? Still, are movies going to come out? Like, are we going to be allowed to do art? So I just kept feeling so grateful, like sort of like what Winnie was saying about writing. It's just like, I felt so grateful that this was what we got to do with that time. And there was something about it that felt like we were reaffirming life, if that makes any sense. That was my main memories of it. And then it was we had a lot of talk before we actually started writing, which is what Winnie has sort of alluded to with John and Steven and Winnie and I. And it was 158 hours of Zooming before we ever actually wrote anything, which now in retrospect, I think it's why the movie works so well, is because every moment was interrogated to within an inch of its life. What Winnie's talking about with certain scenes that she had written 350 times before I came on, and then rewrote them 350 more times while I was there. I mean, it's like, I did watch you have those moments. And at the end of the day, the best idea won every single time. And it wasn't because we ran out of time. It wasn't because we finally had to make some sort of choice. It was because the best idea actually rose to the top from so many deep conversations with so many smart people. That was something that now I go forward and I'm thinking about doing other projects just like by myself in a room with a computer. Like, this is a disaster. My life is ruined by you, Winnie. So I'm now just going to be, I don't know, doing that in my own head. No, this is terrible. So now that I've had that process and understood that that's what you can do with something, I'm going to long for it for the rest of my life, because I think it made what we were doing really, really, really special.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to visit our sponsor for today's episode, the Sundance Film Festival. Sundance is returning in person in Park City, Utah, January 23rd through February 2nd, with online screenings beginning on January 30th. But the other date you need to keep in mind is that single film tickets for in-person and online screenings go on sale on January 16th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. That's January 16th, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, for single ticket sales for in-person and online screenings. You could purchase tickets and explore the program at festival.sundance.org. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We turned 12 last summer, and we couldn't have done it without you. And there's a lot going on in the magazine. Our awards season issue, our Gladiator 2 issue is out, and we are continuing to update it with new articles because we're a digital magazine. We could do that. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading the free issue over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop, or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, I'm offering you discount coupon code SAVE5 that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. All you got to do is enter it into your subscription cart at backstory.net. And while you're there, you could even give Backstory as a gift subscription. And one word of advice, the person you're giving the gift to will be notified immediately when you conclude your transaction. So you might want to write on their card the gift of Backstory for a 1-year subscription. And then once they get the card and open it, then you go and you do the thing and they get the email notification. There's plenty of options, but I just wanted you to know once you check out, they're notified immediately. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see us talking on Zoom. It would really mean a lot to me to see you show your support for independent entertainment journalism. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now let's jump right back into our conversation with screenwriters Winnie Holzman and Dana Fox about their latest film, Wicked, which is in theaters now and also on digital.
I was just going to say that just in terms of when you talk about process, I know Dana's like this from having worked with her, and I'm a very collaborative person. I really do love collaborating, but I also love those moments when I'm alone in a room, and sometimes I hate it, but sometimes I really love being alone in a room and it's just about me and what I'm thinking and what I'm going to express. I like a combination of both, I guess I would say. But what I was going to say is like, and this is so obvious, I guess, so excuse me, but every project demands its own way of working. Like there isn't one there. It asks for what it needs. It sort of tells you what it needs, I think. And there isn't one way of doing anything at all. But so this just kind of really, I think Dana, you'll agree, it really just naturally, it seemed like this is just how we need to proceed. I mean, I'm not sure it would ever happen again,
I've never had it happen before, and I can't really imagine a scenario where it has to happen again, but it was really magical in the end. And it was hard. It was very difficult, but it was also really magical. And, you asked about procedural stuff. What happened was basically, Winnie, correct me if I'm wrong, but at a certain point in time, there was a little bit of pressure put on us where it was like, we've got stages booked. And I was like, oh my God, you have stages booked, but we don't have scripts. So then it sort of became like, okay, we got to get going. Yeah, that was when the good pressure kicked in. And it was sort of like, okay, here's how we're going to just figure out how to split up this work and do it as efficiently as we possibly can.
We divided things up. But then we would always switch over and look at each other's and weigh in. We were never in the same room. For one thing, from what Dana just described about the times, but also that wasn't really what was needed. That wasn't how we were proceeding. We were taking turns and we were dividing up the script. But this was after these long, in-depth group conversations with John and with Stephen Schwartz. And John, as Dana has said in the past on other panels, like John, was this wonderful balance between he had a lot of ideas and like just incredible ideas, a lot of which are in the movie. He had amazing ideas, very, very exciting, but he also wanted to hear from us. So he was never dictating, in a demanding way, but he was also revealing a lot of what he was picturing. This is really helpful. And it was also, let's face it, pragmatic, because we had to move along, as Dana was saying. We had to hear what he's picturing, but he was never so doctrinaire that he wasn't open to hearing what Stephen and I thought of that, for instance, or what Dana thought might work, in that moment. I think I would leave those conversations exhausted.
Yeah, always, every day.
In a great way. They were very intense. But they were not adversarial. They were just very, we were all working hard.
I mean, I often ask writers about their outlining phase, and obviously this is adapting a work that's already adapted from a book, so you knew where you were headed. And I feel like those conversations almost were your outlining phase, and that's what allowed you, once you
exactly
got your major problems and issues addressed, you knew where you were writing to once you started writing. Well, so I want to get into the spoilers. So podcast listeners on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, if you have not yet seen Wicked, it's still in theaters, so you could go see it that way, but also you can now see it on VOD. There's even bonus features like deleted scenes and making of documentaries. I highly recommend you do, because we are going to get into the spoilers, so you have been warned. Briefly, was there ever a moment where you were just going to try and adapt the musical, which I think would have been a mistake? I'm glad that you expanded it. And do you remember the moment when you realized, okay, not only are we going to expand what was in the musical with brand new scenes, possibly even new songs, I'm sure you realized, but we're going to make it not one movie with an intermission, possibly like a Lord of the Rings movie. I could have seen it like a 3-hour movie, maybe with an intermission, but we're going to make it 2 complete movies. Do you remember when that was decided in this process?
Well, first of all, even before John Chu came aboard, there was talk amongst myself, Mark Platt, and Stephen Schwartz about the idea of making it 2 movies. Okay. And we were really giving great consideration to that. I had a lot of worries about it. I think understandably. I felt like, well, will it be a full experience? Will it be fulfilling enough? However, it started to become super clear that that's what we needed to do. And around that time, John came into the picture. It became so clear because, Jeff, what we really wanted, Stephen and I wanted so much for this to be its own, not only its own thing, capturing the spirit of the show, of course, and true to the spirit of the show. But we wanted it to be its own rich experience. Part of the fun for us and part of the artistic excitement for us of doing a movie was the idea that we could go deeper to certain things that we don't have time to examine on stage. So what's the fun of being faithful? I mean, honestly, it was the opposite. The idea of being faithful to the stage play in a sort of dogged way, in a sort of slavish way. It was the opposite of what I wanted. And that's one of the reasons that it was exciting to me. I did, during that time described as wandering in the desert, I did go far afield sometimes and really try things that were very different. But I just felt I had to. I felt like that was part of my job to try to think.
Actually, that was my next question, because it's always fun to hear writers talk about left turns, something that they wrote. Yeah. That in their mind, this is definitely going to be in the movie for a day, a week, a month, but then it never even
had a few.
Page. Please, Winnie, starting with you, tell us a left turn that you had either in development or when you were working with Dana, and then Dana will get to your left turn.
This one has to do with way before Dana and John Chu arrived. I got this idea one day, and I thought it was like amazing. And I'm not saying it isn't a good idea, but it ended up not being the right idea for us. I was always a little concerned. I had many concerns. I have many concerns. I'm a worried girl. I'm an anxious, worried person. One of my worries was Linda is going to get to that palace. And she's going to decide to stay. And it's going to seem cheap, like she's just a sellout. And there's nothing more to her. How will we still respect her care? One of my worries. And in the play, it happens very quick. It's like there isn't time. I got this idea. What if Galinda Upland is actually from the lower uplands, not the upper uplands? What if she's actually poor and she's fronting that she's this girl with Louis Vuitton luggage, and she's this girl and there's nothing in her icebox, but she has a lot of nice shoes? I really liked this idea. And I thought, then when she walks into that palace, you'll know why she can't resist the palace.
Right.
And also, I had a moment where I wrote all this. I had a moment at the train station, or I think it's at the train station, where she reveals that she's never been to the Emerald City. She's never been anywhere. She's actually not who she's pretending to be. Mark and John Chu, and maybe even you, Dana, I'm not sure if you were Switzerland at this point, just sort of keeping
Probably.
And Stephen began to, Stephen understood why I liked the idea. He understood it, I think, because he knows me so well. But they just persuaded me, you know what, you don't need it. And what's really beautiful is that I got my wish, because in the movie, I do feel like you really understand why she can't resist, because she's not ready to be that person who stands up against injustice. She's not ready. And you can see it, and it doesn't make you dislike her. You identify. I just wasn't sure that was going to come across, and it really, really does. And they persuaded me to drop it. And to pat myself on the back, listeners, I did drop it. I didn't, hold on to something. I just have to love the fact that I was in love with it. Yeah. And I like the fact that I let myself re-examine Glinda.
Well, I mean, it's a cool notion, because it is, like, as they say, a hat on a hat, right? Like, it's one too many, but it's totally baked in that Glinda wants to belong. Exactly. And that's what's important to her.
But you can see why it occurred to me.
Right. Whereas this is also a great outsider story. Dana, what was a left turn for you? Something that was
I don't think I can remember any specific left turns within our process on this one, because I actually am a big believer that every diversion is worth doing. Like, that every single turn you take, every conversation that's on a path that you're off on, most of the time I know I'm not going to actually do that thing, but I have to really believe for a second that I am going to do that thing. And then I figure it all out. And most of the time I get a nugget that I need, that I take back from the path, and I use it in the real version. I love that about the process. I love that you can kind of go off on these little diversions and try to see like, well, what would it be like if those two people were alone in a room together? Like characters that never spend time together. I love to picture them alone in a room together. Just like, well, what would they talk about if you left them alone? So, sometimes I'll just write those scenes just for fun. And then it helps me really know who they are in the scenes that they are in with the people they're in. So for me, left turns are just like, it's absolutely part of the process. I also really find that in general, I'm pretty good at not sticking with the thing that we all have, but rather being able to go like, well, let's throw it all away for a second. Let's just pretend it's about something completely different. Like I actually really find that helpful. Right, Winnie? Like, because it really helps shake up what you're, banging your head against sometimes.
What I'm thinking of is my television background where, we'd always be that in let's say when I'm working with Marshall and Ed and on 30 something or even with So-Called Life, we'd always beat out the episode, but we beat it out in a very, this is how I did it. I mean, how the guys taught me to do it. We'd beat it out, not in a lot of detail. It would be very sketched in, the beats. I like the idea of going home and not necessarily it's not carved in stone. And you're going home and you're wrestling with it and you're going, wait, this actually belongs over here. This is just, it's in the wrong place. And this has got to be a whole different idea. And if you're not doing that, I sort of feel like you're not breaking a sweat. Like you're not really working that hard because it's like, this isn't about, coloring within the lines. It's the opposite of that, and so you have to have that sense of wrestling with something and going, wait a minute, questioning everything. And if you're not doing that, I feel like you're not really doing your job.
That's interesting. Yeah. One of the amazing things about this as a movie, as a part one, is the lack of an antagonist really presenting itself until very late in the third act. Obviously through the wizard and also through Madame Morrible, her name gives it away a little, but really the first—
That's Gregory's name.
But the first we see of it really is through, what happens with Dr. Dillerman and the silencing of animals and the creep of fascism as kind of this invisible force that's working towards them, that's creeping towards them.
Yes.
That's really hard to do.
Under the surface, behind the scenes.
I've never actually thought of that before. That's really interesting. And I think the reason I've never thought of it as not having an antagonist until very late is that because Winnie and Stephen created these characters that are so rich, I always experienced it as the antagonists are inside of them. Elphaba has an antagonist inside of her that is making it really difficult for her to be who she is going to eventually be. Glinda, you can feel that antagonist just raging inside of her. Her own self-doubt feels so obvious to me in all her bravado. And so I think in my mind, I've always pictured it as like the real problem is these girls and their self-esteem and how they feel about themselves. And then you're of course right. There are real antagonists in the world, but I don't feel the lack of it because of all that.
That's fascinating, Dana. I just want to point out that you're painting, aside from the slow creep of fascism, which unfortunately is the world we're also living in the real world, but you're also pinning it on self-sabotage for both of the characters as their deep buried antagonists inside them, which is wild. But Winnie, let's hear your thoughts. That's how I pictured
it, but I don't know. Winnie, what do you think?
Well, I see it more like, first of all, I think there's great validity to what both of you are saying, complete validity. And I also see that the girls are each other's antagonists. It's that's why we have the song, What Is This Feeling? The song where they sing about loathing. It's this thing where you confront somebody and that person feels like everything you want to not deal with. That person is the embodiment of, there's something about that person that makes you wildly uncomfortable, wildly furious and stirred up. What we were trying to capture through that song and that whole idea was the idea that if somebody, when you meet someone that's going to change your life, it's often not, violins and roses. It's often a great sense of discordance. Like, oh my God, my life is my life going to have to change? I'm not sure I'm ready. And also I'm sure I'm not ready. And I'm sure that this person is really, really should not be here, should not exist.
And they're going to make me face that thing inside of me that I don't want to face yet, because I know it's the hardest thing to face. It's the thing inside me. So yeah.
Exactly. So it's sort of married to what you were saying, Dana. it's like another aspect of what you were saying. But that's how I have pictured it.
It was also interesting when there's the fascist takeover of the classroom, and they have the cub in the cage. In the musical, I believe that they just grab the cub and run away. But here, you made it a magical moment where a spell is used to put everyone to sleep.
There's a spell in the musical too, but it's done so differently.
Different, like really different.
It
Talk
doesn't
about that moment, because it was a really cool moment where you see them splintering and you see them taking a very direct stand by putting all their classmates to sleep. Tell us about constructing that moment of the sleeping spell.
Well, that was very collaborative. I mean, I think we were all talking about, we knew it had to be different from the stage. We knew that, Jeff. There were so many, but this was yet another opportunity to expand the moment and not rush it. It happens very quickly on stage. It's not that different dialogue-wise. I think it's almost the exact same dialogue-wise as we do on stage. But in terms of what she ends up doing, this whole idea of the poppies, I think may have come from you, Dana?
I think so, but I think of every idea I had as all of ours, because it was so collaborative what we were doing that I would never have even had it if somebody hadn't said something that they had said right before I thought it. So it's all
I think
all
we,
of ours.
We had agreed we wanted poppies to be in the movie, for instance.
Yes. Because we were building this sense of closeness between her and Dr. Dillamond with the poppies. Yes. And then I think there was a sense of anytime we had something that could also kind of touch the Wizard of Oz gently, we always liked it. So I think that's where we thought about the scene in the Wizard of Oz where she falls asleep in the poppies. And that made the connection there.
And then John just, sparked to it and loved the idea of, he really created, I think, this idea of they're going to be floating, and this is very John Chu, I think. There's going to be dust that settles, that puts them all to sleep. There was something about that was just so perfect for him. And that's part of what Dana is describing, that, again, there's so many ways that it was all about, let's find the solution that John relates to so that it can be this thing that he knows how to do. At the same time, that makes sense for all of us, feels right to Stephen and I. We did this with every beat of the show.
Every single thing.
We really did.
It was a fantastic moment. I know we're starting to run out of time, but I guess the last big question that I have for both of you would be, when it comes down to it, ultimately, there was probably some scene during this process that was your toughest scene, and I'm sure it's different for both of you. And I'm curious.
No, we know what it was.
Well,
we remember.
It could be different for both of you, or you could pick the same one. But so, what was the scene that you kept coming back to over and over again? You were getting the night sweats about, having the nightmares about.
This one scene was sort of what Winnie described when she was saying she felt like she was in a science experiment. I think this one section for her was like the Stanford prison experiment, where like everybody, it was a lot. So you go ahead, Winnie.
It's Elphaba first arriving at Shiz. This is we call this exposition. There's a lot to exposit. There's a lot that needed to happen and needed to get shown, and there's a zillion ways you could do it.
I was trying to think about why was that section so difficult, and it wasn't just, it was the confluence of a lot of things that made it difficult. It was the beginning of world building at Shiz, where you had to really believe that was a place. It was the introduction of several new characters. It was the introduction of the idea that the animals are being persecuted. It was the introduction of Morrible. It was them coming to school. And it was the handoff of the point of view from Glinda to now being about Elphaba's emotional journey, because it starts with her singing and narrating and talking about Elphaba, and then Elphaba kind of has to take over, and it has to start being that we are tracking Elphaba's emotional journey at that moment. So it was also a POV handoff in addition to all of those
really
things.
Well said. That's right. It's like, but there's this interesting thing where, and actually Arthur taught me this. He used to say to us, what is the scene for? Just the way Dana just detailed it. Sometimes if a scene doesn't have that many things that it's for, it's a less interesting scene. But sometimes if a scene has too many things that it's for, it can be, it can kind of collapse under its own weight. So it was this balance, this delicate balance of like, how much time to spend with this? how to exactly explain this moment, and when to slow down, when to speed it up. Now, when I look at it, I do feel kind of sheepish. I feel like, why was that so hard? It looks so easy.
Well, it's so elegantly done in the movie. It's just like boop, bloop, bloop, bloop. Isn't this fun? And I look at it and start to sweat a little bit when I watch
it. Was hard work. It was hard work to get it to look that easy, right?
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
you both picked the same scene. Was there anything that on the side one of you had your own private battle with that you want to bring up in addition to that scene? Was there another scene that was giving you the
That was the one for me.
That was the
one I remember the most. Yeah.
But I have to say, difficult. All of it was, it was just challenging in a great way. I mean, I was saying this just recently, one of the things I love about being a writer is that I've never felt like it was easy. I never felt like I knew what I was doing exactly. I always felt a little bit inadequate, a little bit not good enough. And that might sound pathetic, but it's a wonderful thing in a way, because it makes you rise to the occasion, and it makes you feel like you're learning all the time, and it makes you feel like you're accomplishing things that you weren't sure you could accomplish. I feel like that's been a wonderful way of life.
I mean, that's what's so interesting about this, though, Winnie, is that, imposter syndrome, which is what you're talking about, is also what the characters in Wicked suffer a bit too. They don't think they're adequate. They don't think they're good enough, but they are. And it's kind of like that learning journey that they go on, that both of you went on, because, the one thing I would say is that, yes, you were lost in the desert for a little while, maybe developing this, but it was absolutely worth the wait.
It was so worth the wait. Worth the wait. Yeah.
I love this screenplay. You did a lot of heavy lifting to make it look really smooth. Dana, Winnie, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I hope we talk again. Thanks again for coming down today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, this was amazing. Thank you so much.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to screenwriters Winnie Holzman and Dana Fox for being so generous with their time and chatting with us about their latest film, Wicked, which is in theaters and also available on digital. And as our recovery from the wildfires continues, remember you could donate anytime to a bunch of great organizations, including the LAFD Foundation Wildfire Emergency Fund, which helps out our firefighters, and also the California Fire Foundation, which helps out victims of fires throughout the state. Thanks for considering throwing a little something their way. I also hope you'll check out today's sponsor, the Sundance Film Festival. Tickets go on sale for in-person and online screenings on January 16th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. You could find out everything you need to know and buy tickets at festival.sundance.org. So check it out. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We turned 12 last summer, and we couldn't have done it without you. And our Gladiator 2 issue is live. It's our award season issue, and we are updating it with new articles because we're a digital magazine, and we could do that. If you've never test drove us before, you could read the free issue at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop, or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. Remember, you could also give Backstory as a gift subscription. All you got to do is tick the little gift subscription box in your checkout card at backstory.net. But one word of advice, once your transaction is complete, the recipient is notified immediately. So you might want to write it on a card and say, you've got a 1-year subscription to Backstory. And then once you give the card and they open it, then you go and you complete the transaction. Or you could send it to yourself, and then once you give it to them, you could write us, and then we'll change their name to the recipient rather than your name, so that could work. There's plenty of options to give the gift of Backstory to the storyteller in your life. That's all I'm saying. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see us talking on Zoom. It would really mean a lot to me to see you show your support for independent entertainment journalism. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2025. All rights reserved.
If you want to drop me a line, you could always find me on Twitter as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. Those same handles work on Instagram, Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. Those same handles work on Blue Sky, Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. I also have a Facebook fan page, so you can find me there. Or you could go old school. You could write me an email at backstoryletters@gmail.com. That works too. And no matter where you find me, I'll do my darndest to respond as soon as I can. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.